Aloha, it's Julie Ziemelis, a 365 Hawaii Real Estate Minute and Real Broker, and today I am with Devon, who is going to be telling us all about title today. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell them what you're doing here, and we'll get right into it.
Hi, I'm Devon Kikukala. I'm the branch manager at Title Guaranty Escrow Services in Kailua Kona. I handle the escrow processes, and I've been in real estate in Hawaii for 12 years now.
There we go. One of the reasons we brought Devon to all of you today is the fact that a lot of people don't understand what happens between the time that you say, I want to buy something, and the time that escrow closes and you get your keys. And there is a lot of information that is very, very detrimental if you don't understand it. And I want to make sure that we are not letting you guys make the mistakes that we've seen made in some other different transactions. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is we're going to have you understand the process. Now, this is not going to be a 45-minute walk through escrow. It's going to be a short opportunity for Devon to explain this to you so you know what you're getting into as soon as you say, I want to buy that house. So let's start with what happens when somebody says, I'm making an offer on the house.
So when we receive your signed purchase contract from the lovely agents that you work with, basically what happens is we assign an escrow number and open an escrow account, which is a sub bank account and a file to maintain the documents that you need to get you from the time that you sign your purchase contract to when you actually own and complete the purchase of the home that you're buying or the property that you're buying. We're in charge of collecting the funds as well as the final closing documents to finalize your purchase of that home. We also work with lenders, surveyors, termite inspection companies to handle payments that are required per the purchase contract that you sign.
Wow, that's pretty good. Now, the thing happens here, though, is that people might not say, well, who actually opens escrow? So who's responsible for actually saying, okay, who needs to go and approach a title company to start with?
When you were working with real estate agents, typically your agent will present the contract to the escrow officer assigned, and it is actually something that is listed in the purchase contract. Most of the time, the brokers that you work with will have a relationship with an escrow company. However, clients do have the right, if they have a relationship themselves, to request a particular officer and company to handle the title and escrow work for their transaction. So most of the time, we work directly with the agents to receive the contract, contact information for the clients that we're working with. We assign the escrow number and then reach out to the buyer directly to collect the initial deposit due.
There we go. And if you guys don't know, usually you try and get that deposit in within 3 days after you actually go into a contract with a house. Now, in terms of if you have a mortgage, somebody has to get a hold of the lenders.
Yes. So actually, when your lender receives the purchase contract, typically from the buyer or their agent, they will reach out to us to request a large set of documents plus estimated fees so they can start their disclosures, which are required by law, to be given to the borrower within 3 days of signing that purchase contract. We typically will work with either the mortgage broker or the direct lender, loan officer, and loan processors to receive and process these requests. It comes with a request for title documents, which we'll talk about a little bit later, as well as verification of funds that are coming into escrow, and also just estimated figures that are related to the property, which include anything from real property tax information to homeowners association dues and fees, and any required closing costs, which are the responsibility of the borrowers.
There we go. And speaking of closing costs, we actually had somebody say that the people came to the table and didn't realize they had to pay closing costs.
Oh, no.
And so that's an important part. Sometimes, that everyone just thinks it's so natural that, of course, everyone knows that it actually costs money to close an escrow. Let's talk a little bit about closing costs. So what does it cost for title and escrow, and what else kind of rolled into that?
Okay, so actually the first exposure that your client should have to your closing costs are directly listed in the purchase contract received. If you're working in a residential purchase contract, they're pretty standard. Commercial contracts have a slightly different split. And then every once in a while, we also work with attorney-generated contracts. If your agent adjusts the closing costs, then of course we follow whatever the instructions are provided in that contract. However, closing costs are determined by your sales price, as well as whatever your lender requirements are if you're dealing with a mortgage company. So oftentimes we can give you a base estimate for what your title fees, your escrow fees, recording charges for the state are, back due taxes and maintenance once we open the transaction. The client, your seller, would have an idea of what their payoff figures would be from any currently existing loans that are attached to the property. But we can help you with that as you're making offers on the property. So if your agent wants to get an idea of what is going to be due at the close of a sale, when you're writing up the offer, if you can give us your property information and some of the details relating to your transactions, we can help you with that as you're putting in your figures for what your offer is to make sure that you're going to be able to complete the purchase that
Right.
you're making.
Because making sure that you have money at the end is very important. Also, what we have found with on the other side of it, on the listing side, is that giving the seller what's it going to cost to basically put this whole thing together. If you're reading this or you're watching this and you're actually selling a house, ask your realtor to give you a estimated closing cost sheet. We realize that is a very important piece of information sometimes because people don't know there's things on there, and we're going to talk about this later. There's this thing called HARPTA, that if you are buying property from out of state and you actually have a second home in Hawaii, that is going to come back and get you if you don't understand it. And we're going to talk about that. But let's say now that you understand what the closing costs are and you're going through the process, how long does it take to actually go through escrow?
That really depends. So if you're doing a cash transaction, if you've had your title work done previously, so you know what to expect, if there are any changes or corrections that need to be made to title, then escrow transaction can go anywhere from a week and a half to 2 weeks, which is considered a very fast.
That's very fast
escrow here in Hawaii. More commonly, we're looking at 3 weeks to a month for a cash transaction. And then if you have a lender, depending on what your lender says, because some lenders can get through loans much quicker, depending on what they're working with than others, typical escrow period would be 45 days on a lender transaction, but anywhere up to 60, depending on how busy the market is.
Yeah. And also how the escrow goes.
Yes, exactly.
Or everybody else who has their hand in the pot of the experience. So when people get their, what you guys don't know, but she's going to tell you about, they get this thing called a prelim, a preliminary title report.
Correct.
And it's something that they should read.
Absolutely.
So tell them a little bit about what a prelim is.
Okay, so we are the escrow portion of it, but one of the first directions to our company is to order a title report. Here in Hawaii, most transactions that are passed through a brokerage and an escrow company will require an owner's title insurance policy. And definitely if you're working with a lender, they're going to ask you for a lender's title insurance policy. A title insurance policy, unlike a homeowner's insurance policy, covers basically the paper trail. We're looking for what's available in the public record, who the legal owner of the property is, and basically it's the assurance that we've searched all the previously recorded deeds to confirm that the person you're buying the property from actually has the right to sell it to you.
I bet you didn't know that. I went to her class and it was like, sometimes that person that you're buying the house from isn't actually the person you're supposed to be buying the house from. I'm like, what that happens then? And then she's like, oh, well then that you cannot get the title insurance. So it creates an opportunity for the person who tries to buy the house next time. They can't buy the house, right?
So that's the primary purpose of title insurance, making sure that nobody else is going to come out of the woodworks and say, hey, I'm also an owner of this property and you owe me some money now. So that's the biggest ask for our buyers. Like, they want to know, when I hand you this check for $1 million, am I gonna get this property without issue? There are many different ways we assure the buyers of that. Agents, you have your disclosure packets that you give them or get from your sellers to deliver to them. But for our portion of it, the title insurance policy, we're looking at the public records. In addition to ownership, we're also looking for things like recorded mortgages, because as much as we'd love to trust all of our sellers, we actually handle the things like payoffs of their mortgages, any taxes that are required in the state that the escrow is run or the county that the escrow is run. And we also look for things like legal descriptions, which helps the attorneys draft the deeds for the property.
And we were in a deal where they didn't realize that their overdue credit cards had actually put a lien against their house.
Yes.
And that was discovered right in the middle of escrow.
So there are many items that can come up when you run your title search. Anywhere from owners that you didn't realize needed to be addressed, credit card debts that were not disclosed to you previously. And the fixes for these items really depend on the companies that you're working with, who is filing these liens and judgments, what the corrections that need to be made, and what court system you're working in as far as where the property records are held.
Right. So it really is that time frame, that 30 days, where they're basically doing discovery. It's kind of like, like a legal experience where they're going to go out there and make sure that everything is clean. So by the time that you get handled that title insurance, you know that it's not going to be a problem. But let's talk about one thing that we realize, one of the things that we're working with, is what happens when it comes back and then you find out that part of the house is leaning over into the next guy's yard.
So that is what we call an encroachment. Now, depending on the transaction, say maybe your buyer's already aware of this, they own that neighboring lot, and that's why they're moving forward with the purchase. No big deal, right? If you have a lender on title to the property, depending on what the level of the encroachment is, will determine what the fix is for that issue. So a lot of times if it's a major encroachment, so if part of your house is built over onto the neighbor's yard, that's usually a deal killer if you have a lender involved. If it's maybe just a roof over the stairwell going up to the house, and your neighbors are friendly, encroachment agreements can be drafted. We usually recommend you speak to an attorney to find out what your liability is in those cases, and then also to determine how to move forward with the fix.
There you go. And it's usually the lender that's going to tell you, and we're not going to insure that with an actual mortgage. But that's when people who pay cash for some of these things, especially let's say like in Ocean View Estates and some of their parts of that sometimes if you're just coming with cash and the price of the house is really low, a lot of that stuff actually happens on this island because of non-permitting and everything else. So it's not a complete deal killer, but if you're trying to get a loan, and that's just not going to happen, right?
Ultimately, yes. The buyer has the power to decide what they're willing to accept for their owner's title insurance policy, but as soon as you're borrowing money, your lender is definitely going to have a say on what's acceptable. Like I said, depending on what the level of encroachment is and how small or large the encroaching feature is, you may be able to get away with what we call an endorsement for specifically the lender's title insurance policy, with the knowledge that your new owner, the buyer, is taking responsibility for any of the liability that is related to that structure.
Okay, good. Okay, so let's see. Okay, now let's talk about real quick. Let's say you're coming from a different state and you think you already know all about escrow and title because you're coming from, let's say, California or Florida. What are some major differences between how Hawaii works with escrow versus another state coming from the mainland?
The things that are going to be the most apparent to you as a buyer or a seller if you're coming from another state with experience in dealing with real estate is every state has different rules about what is acceptable as far as what they need to see for the transfer of a property record. There are certain states where you can take a form into your county clerk, give them the information for where you want your property transferred to, and they will take your form, file everything for you, and update your property records. That's not the case here in Hawaii. In Hawaii, you have to record a deed for any type of property transfer. So even if your trust agreement says, hey, all of my property should go into my trust name, until you record a deed to actually notify the state and make it public record that you're transferring title from your name into your trust, that trust document is not going to help you here. So that's one of the first major things that I've heard multiple times in my career. There's also a big difference in when funds are due. So there are certain states where you sign a check, you sign a deed, you hand it over and call it table funding, and the deal is done. Everything is done in the same day at one time. That's not the case here in Hawaii. We actually will request documents and signed documents and funds into your escrow account in our possession, and then we submit documents to the state of Hawaii. The state actually takes a day to review them, and they don't let us retract documents at that point. So we have to have everything you need to close your deal in hand before the documents go to the state, and then they'll record it the following day at 8:01 to prevent anybody from sneaking anything into the records that would basically encumber your title.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and so this is interesting. My favorite day is when a title officer calls me about 8 o'clock in the morning and says, your deal is done. And that's when the funds are released.
Absolutely.
Agents get paid.
Everyone gets paid.
It's a good day.
Yes,
but when you call and say, okay, now you're done, let's also remind some of our folks here that funding takes a couple of days in Hawaii versus sometimes that doesn't happen on the mainland, right? Like that's a 2-day usually. Okay, so give them a little bit of information about that.
So our policy is we submit at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we have to have your funds in our account to verify that they're good for the benefit of the seller before we give our documents away. The other part of this is, because of the way the contract is written, possession of the property is not transferred until we confirm that the state has recorded your deed. This is another item that's very specific to Hawaii. So here in Hawaii, we have a state recording system. We have one Bureau of Conveyances that handles the recording of all deeds for all properties statewide. In a lot of other states, there are county recordings, so they handle smaller areas, and the process for which to get them passed is a lot easier. They're not as picky. If you ask any attorney here, knowing the requirements in Hawaii to get a deed recorded is crucial. If you have somebody trying to submit a document that's not drafted by a Hawaii attorney, there's a very, very good chance the state's not going to like it and what we call reject it. Basically say, hey, you're missing 3 inches at the top of your first page for a recording stat. So
seriously, is that bad?
Yeah, it's that specific. So actually, the agents, the Board of Realtors were very smart. They knew that once a seller has their money, it's going to be really hard to get them to come back and make any sort of correction. So they specifically listed in the contract, it doesn't matter when the money comes in, it doesn't matter when the deed is signed, until that deed is recorded, then the transaction is done, right? So again, it goes back to how difficult the recording system here in Hawaii is, and wanting to make sure that that step is finalized before basically they lose their ability to encourage the sellers to come back and help with any clerical errors that have been made. Yeah.
Okay. One thing I learned twice now is until you get that phone call, the people who are now thinking they own the house shouldn't go in the house. We had somebody actually move their stuff in 3 days before the close of escrow because they figured it was a done deal. And so it's like, oh, no. Yes. But also going back to what the state does, one thing, and this is kind of like in the weeds if you love this stuff, we have 2 ways of recording title. It's not recording title, but how there's the land court, and then there's the
regular system.
System.
So we call them, there are 2 recording systems in the state of Hawaii. Land court was specifically designed to handle only property records, and everything recorded through the land court system has to be related specifically to a property. Regular system handles not only property records, but they also handle a myriad of other recording types. So liens and judgments against individuals, child support, anything basically that you want to put into the public record is submitted to the regular system for recording. There are also properties here in Hawaii that are recorded in both land court and regular system. The biggest difference as far as what your experience will be in escrow will be what to do if there are changes that need to be addressed to the people who currently own title. You have to remember the recording systems here are stagnant pictures of what happened at the time the property was acquired. So if you have a couple that was married and has since divorced, the Bureau does not speak to the other departments in the state. So even if the divorce was filed here in Hawaii, there's not going to be anything that tells the Bureau of Conveyances that, hey, these 2 people were divorced. You actually have to go in, collect the evidence for whatever the changes have been, and then submit them to the land court clerks for review and approval. They file those documents, and once they're happy with what has been submitted, they will give you the filed, what we call a filed petition, which then is recorded at the Bureau of Conveyances. So in land court, the requirements to change anything shown on the last recorded deed take time to process. Whereas in the regular system, we basically submit copies of the evidence, the same things that you would provide to the land court, showing whatever the changes are. Sometimes people record affidavits, which are documents basically attesting to what the changes are, and record them just for clarity's sake. But actually that's not required for most of the changes. It's just submission of the documents to evidence what has happened since they initially acquired the property.
Okay, so this is good to know if you're selling a house and you're thinking about getting divorced.
Correct.
Right, because there's going to be some time that you're going to need to get this all handled before you decide to put the house up for sale.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I'm actually dealing with something like
Well,
that.
and also too, pending divorces are another item that you should be aware of. If you have a pending divorce, that is something that everyone should be aware of because of what happens in a divorce case. Even if your spouse is not entitled to the property, if you're mid-divorce, they may be required to sign off acknowledging the fact that they're aware of the sale.
Okay.
Yeah.
These are all very interesting experiences. And then I'm trying to think what else. So what, I think we've kind of gone through the process. Is there something that you think that they should know?
Another thing specific to Hawaii is you have to be familiar with our banking systems here. A lot of the banks that are available here are specific to Hawaii, and a lot of the banks that you deal with out of state are not here. So another really big item that I get very concerned with are your travel plans. If you have a buyer that's planning to come to do their final inspection, we have to make sure they've talked to their bank to confirm that they can initiate the wire transfer to get the funds from their account there here without physically showing up at a branch. So if you're here for the last 2 weeks of your transaction and haven't talked to your banker, you may run into an issue like, yeah, you can set up a wire, but you can only send $5,000 and you can only send 4 wires in a month. Or you can run into a transaction where they say, you absolutely cannot send a wire unless you show up here in person. So being aware of the fact that the financial resources here are different than what you may be coming from, and making sure that you have that conversation ahead of time with your banker can prevent a lot of those issues from coming up.
There you go. And that stops people from who are on vacation thinking, oh my God, I love living here. I'm just going to buy this house. Oh, okay. Well, where's your initial deposit? Well, I have Bank of America over in the mainland. Oh no, you will not be giving money away then. So you have to go back to that bank and then come all the way back again. Yes. So Devon, one of the things I like working at your company is you actually have a lot of interesting resources for people. Tell us a little bit about what you have for the public to see and maybe for the realtors as well.
One of the best resources I can offer both to any broker working in Hawaii or the clients that are considering buying or selling property here is our website. tghawaii.com has fee estimators on it. We have a resources page that give you samples of the forms you're going to run into when you get into escrow. They also have these wonderful TG Talks, which are little videos that cover some of the topics that we discussed today. We have tenancy videos, what is title and escrow. We also have little videos on the FRIPTA and HARPTA withholdings that came up earlier. So if you are interested or you want to learn a little bit more about these items, I really highly recommend that you go to tghawaii.com, check out the resources tabs, and peruse through the videos that we have to offer. In addition, you can meet our teams on the different islands. They give you contact information for the owners of the company as well as the escrow officers and the branch managers on the different islands. And again, if you're an agent and you're in a pinch and you need a quick estimate and nobody's available for you at that time, even in the middle of the night, you can jump on there and generate your own estimate with just answering just a few questions that are listed there.
There you go. And one thing that I didn't know about was the fee schedule. So you can go on the website and figure out, again, how much the title and escrow fees will be. And so thank you. And also you have an app, also a mobile app?
Yes, we do. We have a couple of apps actually. So TG Agent 1 is for agents specifically, and that also has an estimator feature, which is highly recommended that you use because if you're on the fly and you need something very quickly, you can plug in your property information and your sales price, loan amount, and it'll give you a rough estimate about what you're going to encounter in your transaction.
Okay. Yeah. There we go. And we know sometimes realtors watch our videos, so make sure that you get a chance to use TG. We love working with Devon and our friend Rhett as well. So we'll leave the website in the comments below so you guys can go directly to their website as well. Sounds like we did a pretty good job of wrapping up how the title and escrow process works for people who want to buy a house in Hawaii, right? And we have more segments to show you guys because there's more things we can talk about. But thank you, Devon, for helping us understand this issue.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.